Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
This is Nashville. I'm Nina Cardona, sitting in for your host, Khalil Ekulona. For almost a decade now, the Metro Arts Commission has championed diversity and inclusion in the city's art scene. There are grants for artists from communities that often struggle for funding and attention. But last year, employees of the arts department started to speak publicly about how the agency was failing to live up to its own standards around equity. The accounts paint a picture of tokenism and unfounded disciplinary measures. To put it more plainly, they describe racist discrimination at Metro Arts. After more than a year of reckoning and a new executive director, what is the path forward for Metro Arts? But first, a few months ago, Tennessee's abortion law changed dramatically. Once the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision cleared the way, a trigger law went into effect that bans nearly all abortions in the state. There is no exception to save the life of someone who is pregnant. Instead, a physician who performs an abortion can defend the decision in court after being charged with a Class C felony. This week, the Nashville Banner has the story of what happened when doctors had to stop caring for a pregnant patient and wait for lawyers to weigh the legal risks of saving her life. Steve Cavendish reported the story. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Great to be here.
The woman at the heart of this story chose not to make her real name public, so we're calling her Sarah. How did you find out about her?
Through social media, I had seen some kind of details of a story. This happened roughly a week or two after the state's abortion trigger ban had gone into place. And so I started reaching out through direct messages and other kind of ways to try to talk to this woman. And after a few months, she agreed to talk to me.
What went wrong with Sarah's pregnancy?
So she had an ectopic pregnancy, which was a tremendous surprise to her because this last summer, she had an IUD, which is a form of birth control, put in.
Oh, wow. So she didn't even anticipate being pregnant.
No, and she woke up on a Tuesday and was feeling bad, and then said, okay, well, maybe I'll see how I'm doing tomorrow, and then called a friend of hers who was a nurse practitioner, and the next day and said, I've got sort of these symptoms, and she said, well, you better get that checked out. It could be an appendix. And so the next day, she's a teacher, and I think this kind of reflects on most teachers. She went ahead and did her class that day, and this was on a Thursday, and she had taken herself to Vanderbilt to the emergency room, and at the emergency room, they can be kind of chaos anyway. Yeah. Particularly if Vanderbilt is a level 1 trauma center. There's a lot of bad cases that come through there. Sometimes if it's not the most serious thing in the world, you have to fight for attention. And so she got triaged. And then after a couple of hours, they started to figure out, wait a minute, could she be pregnant? Which was a complete surprise to her. And they performed a test, found out she was pregnant. And at that point, everything sort of kind of ground to a halt because this was about 7 days after the state's ban had been in place. It was one of the first cases they'd had to deal with. And I think all of Nashville's hospitals had been talking about it, both through their counsel and to each other about, okay, if this goes into place, as they knew it would have after the Dobbs decision in June, what happens to us? How do we act within this?
And let's just make sure that everybody's on the same page. If listeners aren't incredibly familiar with the term, but an ectopic pregnancy, that's not viable.
It is not a viable pregnancy.
And it is generally a danger to the pregnant person.
It's a fertilized egg, but it happens outside of the uterus. Typically, it implants, as it did with Sarah, in the fallopian tube. And so what happens is it continues to grow. It's pregnancy tissue. And as it gets bigger and bigger, kind of outside of the uterus, it begins to sort of wreak havoc. And this is what happened with Sarah.
So like you said, this is one of the first cases of doctors having to sort out what they can and can't do for this patient who is at risk because of a non-viable pregnancy. So what did they do?
So she was, and I'm talking to her a couple of months later, and she was very candid, but I think she also had a little bit of perspective with it. And so she was actually quite funny in our interview. And she said, as I'm sitting there, a doctor came in and had said something that they thought would be comforting to me, but which is not the most comforting words in the world, which are, don't worry, we've got legal involved.
Oh.
And so the hospital ended up inserting about 20 paragraphs into her medical charts, which I had a chance to examine, and in what is called an affirmative defense strategy, written into the state's abortion law, which bans everything, is some language that says it's an affirmative defense to this law to treat a woman who may need life-saving care. So
basically, you're saying that preparation for potentially having to talk to a judge about what they did is just written all through her medical chart.
Right. And this is the hospital and the doctors covering themselves with legalese in order to be able to treat what is a fairly standard thing. And an OBGYN that I talked to in the story was like, look, this is part of our care. This is part of what I have to do as a doctor, is to be able to treat women who come into these conditions. This is not a rare sort of thing. In Tennessee, there were, and I've got this in the story, there were 1% to 2% of all pregnancies are going to end up being ectopic. So you're talking somewhere between 750 and 1,500 women every year, or 3 a day, who are experiencing this problem. And so what happens when this eventuality comes into play? So
as you talk to other doctors, had they heard about this case?
Yeah, and I think this ended up being one of the first. I can't say it was the first case because the hospitals will not talk about patient care.
But it was definitely very early.
It was within the first week of the trigger ban going in.
And so they'd heard about it, and I mean, they're talking about this and watching.
Yeah, I mean, and doctors talk, and hospitals talk. I mean, I think one of the things that was really interesting to me was that the legal officers at different hospitals, and there's HCA has a number of hospitals here. Ascension has a bunch of other hospitals. I mean, that's most of them. But all of those CEOs and legal officers and chief medical officers, I think, are talking to each other around big issues like this, because whatever the political ramifications of it are, they have to treat patients, and they have to treat these women who are coming into them.
So you mentioned the affirmative defense aspect to this and what that means. How does that line up with other Tennessee laws?
I mean, this is an outlier. I mean, affirmative defense is in, and I'm not an expert in all of Tennessee, all the Tennessee Code annotated, but this is a rare sort of thing, and this is what several states have put in 2019 is when Tennessee passed this. They were following the lead of several other states who had put these provisions in that said, okay, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, our state immediately either bans abortion or bans it down to 15 weeks or bans it down to 6 weeks, or there's a number of different kind of pieces to it. But some of them have this affirmative defense language, and I think it's fairly common. This was a kind of a common tactic within the legal movement to try to ban abortion, was to put this in because there are no other exceptions. There's no exceptions for rape. There's no exceptions for incest. And there's no exceptions for the life of the mother, except this sort of piece of it. And this is what, there's a little bit of kind of, first year law school kind of going on here, which is, what does this question mean? Is it illegal that I'm doing this if I have a defense to it? And what lawyers say is that, well, it's a Class C felony. The act of it doesn't matter if there's a defense to it. it's still illegal technically for you to do this. So then you're at the discretion of the prosecutor, and are we going to have prosecutors, going after doctors?
Right. One of the legislators who supported this law is a doctor, Republican Representative Richard Briggs. But now he says he has misgivings about it. What do you make of that?
This came from a ProPublica article where he said, look, the pro-life lobby in Tennessee is very strong. The pro-life lobby was pushing very hard for this. And a lot of legislators, it's very important for them to have a 100% pro-life rating. And there were political ramifications if they didn't. They might get primaried. They might get voted out kind of within in a general election. And Briggs said that he and others had been just like rubber stamping this legislation through because they didn't think, A, that Roe would ever be overturned, and B, that this law was ever going to come into place.
With all of the strong political opinion that's just swirling around the whole issue, how did Sarah feel about letting you share her story?
She wanted to share it. She had to get to a place where she would share it. But once she did, she was incredibly generous with her time. And most importantly, she showed me all of her medical records and kind of let me go through and see that, here's 20 graphs of legal language in the middle of her treatment. She, I think, is, and she mentions this in the story, she's flabbergasted by the doctors would have to be in a position of actually breaking the law in order to treat her. And she said something which I thought was really interesting, which she said, look, I have a lot of privilege. She said, I have lawyers in my family. I have all kinds of support here. And she said, I'm in the middle of Nashville. I have access to world-class care at a number of different hospitals. What if I'm a woman without those, without all of those benefits in a rural setting, that doesn't have access to a great hospital, who doesn't have access to a doctor who's willing to perform the care, because it's the doctor's choice, not to. I mean, some doctors will not perform abortions; that's their right. But she said, what happens if I am in a situation where I didn't have all of this? She said, I feel very, very lucky, and she told me all of this because I think she and others would like to have exceptions written into the law.
Well, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Steve Cavendish is the editor of the Nashville Banner. His report on Sarah's case is out now. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll look back at the reckoning at Metro Arts over discrimination in its own offices. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Nina Cardona, and this is Nashville. Let's go back to June. The city's Public Facilities, Arts, and Culture Committee is meeting, and artist Simone Boyd has waited for her turn to speak as a member of the public. She says she's concerned about charges that have been filed against Janine Cristiano, the Metro Arts Grants Coordinator. Simone is Black, and Janine is Asian American. After introducing herself, Simone describes what she calls a culture of retaliation and intimidation at Metro Arts, a culture of silencing dissent, and a culture of double standards for employees of color.
And this culture of intimidation and retaliation has been allowed to bloom under Chair Jim Schmidt with coordination from Ian Myers. So what I'm asking is this committee here, if you would please write a letter asking for the resignation of Jim Schmidt and Ian Myers.
Well, I for one, appreciate the opportunity for any constituent, any citizen of Nashville to be able to have a place, to have a voice, and to communicate it. And I'm glad that you've had that opportunity here today.
The second voice you hear is Metro Council member Nancy Van Rees, who is white. She is vice chair of the committee. She goes on to say, basically, that there's nothing the committee can do at the moment. After this exchange, another council member speaks up. Sharon Hurt, who is black, asks Simone if she has more to say. You'll hear her voice in this next clip after Simone Boyd and Nancy Van Rees.
Thank you for that. I would just note that Ian Myers brought the charges against Jean Cristiano, and he's also serving on the review panel for her hearing, which I think is a conflict of interest. And I would just say there's already been a fact-finding report. And so you all have the power to send a signal for all of Nashville that you want equity. In the heat of 2020, a lot of things were said and done, but now it's time to see action.
I appreciate it. But I don't think that this committee is in a position to take any action at all until the complete evaluation is done. There are other things still pending.
We may not take action, but I still want to make sure that she is heard to completion. So if there's more that you want to say,
I would ask that you all make sure that dozens of people have written comments, and they're not even viewable on the Metro Arts website.
Okay, that's
there's no minutes available from those meetings,
okay.
And that is a pattern of silencing dissent. And I feel like in this moment I'm being silenced, which is unfair.
Oh, I apologize if I've caused that.
That's okay. I'm used to it. I'm a black woman, so.
That's unfair.
It's a little difficult to hear at the end, but Simone Boyd says she's used to being silenced as a black woman. And Nancy Van Rees responds by saying that's not fair to her. Now, the grants coordinator in question, Jean Cristiano, was later terminated by the Metro Arts Commission. We asked her to join us on today's show, but she declined, citing ongoing legal matters. If you noticed, Simone Boyd said there was a pattern of silencing dissent. So we reached out to other Metro Arts employees who were targets for discrimination. Cecilia Alushala Tribble declined our interview request, explaining that the whole experience drained her. She says she went through the worst sustained racism she's ever experienced in her life. She added that her health and mental well-being, as well as her family's, were all compromised because of her experience there. So today we'll be talking with people who saw what was going on. Wilna Julmus-Taylor is the assistant director of the Curb Center, and she co-directs a program with Metro Arts called Racial Equity in Arts Leadership, or REAL. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Wilna, what is REAL, and how has Metro Arts been involved?
So REAL is an initiative to help arts organizations in Nashville to think about how equity is being applied, to help establish a sense of what it means when we're talking about equity and belonging, and how to do the hard work together, because supremacy culture affects us all, right? Those in majority groups and those in non-majority groups. And so we come together and we discuss and we try to give the tools and techniques and the lived experiences that we know could hopefully help us build that beloved community that we're striving for here in Nashville.
We just heard a statement from Alushala. How did she work with REAL?
She is one of the founding people from Metro Arts, from what I understand. She and the previous assistant director at Curb, along with the director of Curb, the past director of Curb, established the program, saw the need, and had the vision, and figured that they had the ability with the resources both agencies or organizations had to think about this work and to engage the issues that they saw taking place in Nashville.
So we just heard how Alushala described her experience. She resigned from Metro Arts in 2019 after she was accused of breaking civil service rules. Former Metro Arts employee Laurel Fisher, who is white, vouched for Alushala and basically said that she got in trouble for not exactly following rules that were flexible for other employees. Mm-hmm. Laurel also declined our invitation to join the show today and said she is similarly simply exhausted. What was your reaction when Alushala left?
I, of course, am saddened that it's under the circumstances, right? And I understand that exhaustion that she's talked about. It's one thing to be doing the work and then also living it, right?
Right.
And again, just the saddened that is the outcome. Yeah.
Did you start asking questions about, what happened? What's going on here?
I did, because, stepping into the role as the co-facilitator with Janine, I had to get a sense of what are we doing here? Because I was new to the role, and I knew that now there was a shift happening with Janine stepping into it. And so we actually took a sort of hiatus to assess both the program and then the relationship between the two organizations, and just get a sense of the lay of the land and the environment, what was happening. And it was not unfamiliar, right? The issues. Some of it is just being human, and some of it is not having tackled some of the things that came to surface. And I also took it as this is part of the work, right? We have to acknowledge that this is, again, a thing that affects us all, and we have to do the work. The thing that was distressing is, and I think this is one of the things that's caused some morale issues within the cohort this year, is that the agency that is pushing for the work to be done and to say that they're supporting this and behind this was at the center of living it as well, and not performing in the way that one would hope for those who are aware, you would say, and have had the skills or the training or the resources to combat this issue.
Now, you mentioned Janine, and just, for our listeners, that's Janine Cristiano, the person we heard Simone Boyd talking about in those clips, talking about Janine's mistreatment. Mm-hmm. What did you notice about Janine's experience?
So again, we were experiencing it in real time. I think, again, this is from my perspective, I saw her ready to tackle the work and to embrace that this is what it looks like sometimes, right? It's easy to tell others how to do this and how to recognize it, but then when you're in it, it's a whole other story. So I saw her saying, okay, this is now a chance to also put into practice some of the things that, personally she works on and professionally she works on. And as we progress and things became, more problematic, and it was not looking like it was going to go the way we would hope, she became exhausted, like Alushala. Yeah. She was overwhelmed, of course, and there were moments of just distress, right? And not having the support and the acknowledgement and the guarantee that things would be handled in the way one would hope.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm Nina Cardona, sitting in for your host, Khalil Ekulona. We're talking this hour about discrimination in the offices of Metro Arts. And I'd like to welcome my next guest. Alan Fay is a local arts administrator and has worked for organizations that receive Metro Arts funding. Alan, thanks for being here. And welcome to This is Nashville.
Thanks for having me.
Tell me about the petition you started.
In the process of all of this, I was working closely with Simone Boyd, and in like she was saying in that the clip we heard at the top, I basically felt that the leadership at Metro Arts, which at that time in I think it was late June, that was the commission chair, Jim Schmidt, and interim or acting executive director, Ian Myers, because they were both, responsible for what was happening in that sense. And so I started this petition that was calling for their removal, whether that was through Ian's resignation or whatever that needed to be. And and so I sent that out to lots of folks in the arts community, and wasn't sure kind of how that would be received, because I recognize that calling for someone's resignation or removal is a big, that's a lot.
Well, what were the signs that you were seeing that this is bad enough that that's necessary?
Well, for me, one of them was that Janine was terminated essentially for being a whistleblower. And so, I had started the petition after she had been given a charge letter and put on administrative leave and had a disciplinary hearing. And after that, that was really the key point, because I sat in on that hearing as to show support for Janine and voice that in the room, and just seeing the one-sidedness of that hearing, which included 3 other folks in the Metro government and Ian Myers himself on her hearing panel. So then just the fact that he was the one responsible for initiating that and eventually terminating her, and that, Chair Schmidt had been really didn't seem interested in listening to the community, whether it was through the public comment policy or just the lack of transparency in commission meetings, and the fact that legally the Metro Arts Commission is responsible for the executive director of Metro Arts.
So you put this petition out there. What was the response that you were getting from other artists and arts groups? I mean, is this something they had been noticing as well?
Yes. So I got a lot of response, more from individual artists, which actually surprised me, just because that's not, I work with organizations on the most part, so that I'm not as well connected with a lot of individual artists in the community. But I think that was, they had seen this problem, and this was not new. And something that I said even before the very first article came out in the Scene in September 2021, I had heard rumors about a negative, toxic workplace environment. I didn't realize it was rooted in discrimination or racial discrimination, and I think that was what sort of kicked everything off for me personally. But yeah, I got a lot of response from them. Arts organizations, there were a handful that publicly voiced support. Most of them voiced privately to me or said, hey, I can't speak out on behalf of my organization, but I support you.
So when you hand in this petition, what was the reaction from the Metro Arts Commission?
It was included in the public comment packet for that meeting in June. And there was discussion or mention of all of the public comments that were included, said make sure that we have read these and received these and listened to the community. And that was it. There was not even a literal verbal mention of, hey, there's a petition with over 180 signatures from members of the community.
As someone who competes for Metro Arts grants, who's held to certain standards by that agency, how did that feel? It
honestly, it felt like a personal betrayal of trust, because as the primary, I'm the primary grant writer for some of my organizations, and there's always been questions of equity, both in the written application and the verbal panel that you participate in, and there should be arts organizations receiving this fund should be part of the conversation, is what we're doing as an arts organization to be more equitable, both internally and externally. But then to see that this organization, that Metro Arts that was promoting that, wasn't actually held to the same standards. And it felt like, as a community, even though we were trying to hold them to that standard, it felt like we didn't have any power to do so.
So just to touch on the timeline here, just a moment. The problem of discrimination at Metro Arts was made public in the fall of 2021. This February, outside consultants were brought in, and in April, Caroline Vincent resigned her job as the director of Metro Arts. And in fact, in the last 11 months, half of the staff at Metro Arts have stepped down. Wilna, how has all of this turmoil affected the REAL program?
Like I mentioned earlier, the morale was definitely shaken. We haven't been able to establish closure. with the program, we just have, major contributors have, Janine being one of them, is no longer there. So having to figure out how to keep the work going, because it is important work, and the organizations involved and the individuals who applied to be part of REAL are invested. But it was just this weird combination of things, right? That, like you said, that the accountability wasn't there from the organization that's talking about how to think about and engage and practice accountability. And then the co-director is fired, right? So we have part of the redesign that Janine and I put into place with this new iteration of REAL is there's a 6 months of workshop and learning, setting the ground rules, learning the language of equity work and anti-racism and such, and then 6 months of practicum. So actually taking the work and going back to your organization and practicing it so that you get it into, muscle memory, right? It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to try to do it. Yeah. So we have not been able to, outside of reading the reports, assess and have a closing discussion about how those things went.
After the break, we're going to bring in the new Metro Arts Director, Daniel Singh. What questions do you have for him?
I think I've had some conversations with Daniel, and I think he is, or has expressed to me his interest in continuing REAL. I'm just curious on how he's inherited a lot, right? A lot of difficult things. I'm curious on how he is going to work on establishing the trust, and how he's going to implement accountability, and how REAL is going to function in this new design.
And of course, REAL being a program that is all about exactly what has been the problem.
Yeah.
At Metro Arts that we have discovered in the last little while. Well, Willett Julmus Taylor is the assistant director of the Curb Center. Alan Fay is an arts administrator who's been involved in many ways around Nashville. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about next steps with the two people leading Metro Arts into its next chapter. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is Nashville. Before the break, we heard about the allegations of tokenism and discrimination at Metro Arts. Former employees say they were silenced or held to unfair standards because of their race. Many left or were fired. The agency's executive director resigned. So where does that leave Metro Arts, and how can it move forward? My next guest had the job of rebuilding the agency. Daniel Singh was named this year to be the new executive director of Metro Arts. And Mattia Powell is the new chair of the Metro Arts Commission, the community board with oversight of the agency. Thank you both for joining us today. Daniel, how much did you understand about the problems at Metro Arts when you applied for the job as director?
So I heard what was happening in the media, and I understand that it's usually one side of the story. And so I also had done my research before I came, and I felt like equity work takes practice, and it's an iterative practice. It's not something that happens in a straight line. So the fact that there was work happening and that the agency had committed to equity in its mission statement were all good signs for me. And I understood that it'll be messy. We're going to go one step forward, two steps back. And so I came in with my eyes open. Yeah.
Why did you want the job?
So, Nashville has this amazing history of being the music city. It's the Athens of the South. The public arts program in Nashville is renowned nationally. I had a friend in D.C. who'd worked at Vanderbilt and spoke really highly about her time in Nashville and the culture here. And all my life I'd lived in DC area, so I wanted to have a chance to experience Nashville and the arts thriving here. So I thought this would be a nice moment to try to make that happen.
Now, Mattia, you're not new to the commission. You were there as these problems came to a head and the allegations became public. What went wrong?
Well, I think it's one of those things where, there's not one thing or one person. It's just, I think we had some really good ambitious goals around equity. And, we've had the Diversity and Equity Office of Metro Government work with us. And I think one of the things that was clear to them is that we really needed to have a unified vision for equity. And I'm not sure that we actually had that. I think everybody really believed in equity, believed in the mission statement, but like the practical and operational things that have to happen to make equity work, I'm not sure if we had all those things that we needed. So, I think one of the things we have to do moving forward is making sure that we have a clear vision of where we want to go with our equity work, that the commission, and this is also a recommendation from that particular report, is that we have a clear vision, that the commission and the staff and all the community understands that vision, we're aligned around it. And then that we have some really benchmarks on how we're going to get to that vision. And that's what really we're working on now, is really to make sure that we're all on the same page with this vision and we know how we're going to get there.
I mean, you say you felt like there was vision there to begin with. And clearly for the greater arts community and the way that arts organizations are expected to operate, there was. Had there been specific thought about, well, how do we treat our own employees?
I think part of this vision is really figuring out how we're going to work together and really make sure that we're aligned on this vision. I think that as Daniel mentioned, equity work is definitely messy, and I think internal equity work is super important. We have to make sure that everybody understands where we are, that we're all on the same page, that we have transparency, we have mechanisms for people to really be able to live out this work. And so, clearly we had some challenges around that. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. We definitely had some challenges. We have seen that we've had challenges for that, and we don't want to repeat those challenges. So we're definitely being way more intentional and making sure we define this process moving forward, making sure the staff feel like they're supported in this process. I think that's super important. Making sure that the commission is aligned around where we're going and that they're ready to support the staff, making sure the community is aligned around it and we're all on the same page. So, we definitely, made some mistakes, but we want to move forward.
So when you hired Daniel as the new executive director, what marching orders did the commission give him?
Well, we did. I don't know about marching orders. I think, we were clear about where we were. I think one of the things that we really loved about Daniel was that he had some experience in this work around equity. He was also an artist, so he understood it from an artist perspective as well. We wanted somebody that had some experience operationalizing it, and I think he brings that. But also he brings the art perspective as well as an artist. I think we gave him the orders of we're here to support you. We want to make sure you're supported in this work. So it wasn't necessarily orders. I wouldn't want to say that we gave him marching orders.
Okay, that's
I would say that, we hired him. We wanted to support him in this work. We were, clear about where we were and the challenges that we faced. And we're trying to make sure that he's supported as we work through all of the challenges.
So Daniel, now that you're here and you're getting to know Nashville, you're getting to know this community in this time of these very strong challenges with how Metro Arts goes forward with being a more equitable place to work. What are you hearing from the community on that issue?
So I think the community really wanted us to acknowledge and be accountable. And I think we're working on doing that both by setting up internal processes to do that. We're looking at how we can have mentorship for staff. I'm making sure there's no hierarchy. Staff can come to me directly. They don't have to go through the managers. Staff can go to the diversity officer directly. They don't have to wait to talk to me if they need to get support externally. We're providing them that. We're working to make sure we have external consultants come in periodically and train staff and commission committees all to get us on that same vision that Mattia was talking about. So those are some of the processes we're putting in to make sure we hear what the community is saying, that we should be aligning our processes internally as well as externally. And so I think it takes time, we talk about culture change and we can start something that's technical quickly, but culture change is something like changing someone's diet before a heart attack. It's going to take a while for us to do that, and we're committed to that. And I think I can speak to my commitment to that, my experience in that, and the Commission's commitment and backing of that. And we're all looking ahead and hoping we can make that transition.
What about your staff? What are they saying that they need to make sure that Metro Arts is a safe and an equitable place to work?
I think the staff that are here have kind of been through the grinding of the gears, if you will. And so for them, it wasn't just what was happening at Metro Arts. A lot of things were happening in the world. There was a pandemic, and the Black Lives Matter movement was happening. Me Too was happening. So our understanding of equity itself was changing. What we thought of equity 6 years, 10 years ago was maybe just outreach. And now we're like looking at representation. Are there in your board, in your staff, in your artists? And so our own understandings have changed. And so I think staff want a safe place for them to be able to talk about what their understanding of equity is, and then look at what the agency's understanding is, and can we get there together. And I'm committed to providing that safe space for the staff. And we hope that when we bring in new members, we can provide those same opportunities. And we're being proactive about advertising in a lot of different avenues, but also thinking about how we can start setting up mentorship for them right now, directly, so that we're not waiting till they're here and there's a problem, but we have an ongoing mentorship approach for incoming staff.
Mattia, I'm curious what has stood out to you as, Metro Arts has held a couple of public listening sessions. What has stood out to you that what you're hearing from the community and their feedback?
Yeah, I would echo what Daniel has already said. Is people wanted acknowledgement, and we've acknowledged that harm was caused. We did acknowledge that, and they wanted that acknowledgement. So we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that. They also wanted to be heard. So we wanted we want to provide more opportunities. I mean, we just started this listening session, so we have had a couple. But over the next few months, we'll have more as we, continue to prepare for our strategic planning process. But they wanted an avenue to be heard, and so we heard that as well. And they also wanted an opportunity. They appreciated the opportunity to interact with Metro staff and to be able to share and collaborate with them. We've had multiple opportunities for them to do that over the last few months, and we need to continue to do that. So I heard a lot that hey, this is this is an opportunity that I have to interact with staff. Honestly, maybe the most I've interacted with staff in a while. So we need to continue to provide those external opportunities for the community to interact with our staff, to be a part of the process, because equity isn't just about. Equity is about sharing resources. It's about sharing power, and really bringing the community into these processes is important. And I think that's what they want, and we heard that, and we're trying to make strides towards that already. So that's really what we heard is acknowledgement, opportunities for feedback and engagement, continuously, not just once or twice, but continuously.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm Nina Cardona, sitting in for your host, Khalil Ekulona. We're talking this hour about the future of Metro Arts. Daniel, tell me about your vision for rebuilding Metro Arts.
So I think, the first thing I'd have to do is build a trust in the community, and we're trying to get that started already. We just went through an extensive grant editing process. It was completely community-driven. We had about 27 community members come and walk through every single question on a grant application, and they made the decision on how to move forward on every question. And so that's the kind of commitment I want to bring, and I want to make sure we involve their voices at every step of our path. And the next step would be our strategic planning and cultural planning process, which is going to be a much more longer phase. It might take 12 to 18 months. And again, for that, we'll have a steering committee made up of local artists and arts organizations that'll help us figure out what the new direction is going to be. So those are two ways in which I think we're moving the direction towards building trust and building a relationship with the community. I'm also looking at having a monthly lunch when I can meet with arts organizations, and we're having a monthly coffee hour when we can meet with arts organizations. And part of the changes in the grant application was to simplify the reports, and that was done intentionally to make sure staff can go and get to know the artists and not read 26 pages of reports. Like, I'd rather have my staff go to a performance or go to a rehearsal or go to an artist studio and see what's happening in real time rather than read about it in reports. And so we're trying to connect our operational processes with our vision as well, so that they're not seen as two separate things, but they're actually all working in tandem.
You talked about rebuilding trust. What are kind of the benchmarks that you look for to know, okay, that's actually happening. Trust is actually being established that had been broken?
I think the more people participating in our processes will help us understand that. Like I said, in our grant editing process, we had 27 community members participate. And to me, that's the first step, right? Like, they're not quite sure if they trust us yet, but they're willing to dip their toes in the water. But we hope that it was an affirming experience for them and they'll come back more. We're also opening up public comments in our monthly meeting. So there's a verbal component there, so they can come in and do that in the future. And people are signing up. And this past meeting, we had 10 slots, and we ended up opening it up to 16 public who wanted to comment. And Mattia made that decision because we want to hear from the public. And so I think they're coming and they're talking to us, and those are all signs that they're beginning to see that there's hope. And I think that's all we can do is, get the structures in place and hope that they'll participate in this.
Mattia, Daniel mentioned strategic planning. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that process looks like?
Yeah, I mean, it really is going to be, as Daniel mentioned, a long-term process where we bring in the community to really think about where we want to go over the next 5 to 10 years. There's a lot changing. I think the world is changing. I think the art world is changing. I think our city is changing. And so we really want to make sure that we are hearing all the voices and really bringing people to the table that maybe have not been to the table before. So we want to create this vision with the community and not just with, staff and commission. We want this to be a vision for the city and for our community. So, we're going to embark on this process in the next few months. And we also hope that we can use this process to really come to align around our equity goals and our equity vision. I mean, redefine it. I mean, we have a vision, so I don't want to say we don't have a vision. We definitely have a vision. We're one of the only metro departments that have a vision statement that includes equity. But really, we need to redefine that vision with our community to make sure we're all on the same page. And that'll be a part of the process, as opposed to also, in addition to that, really envisioning and reimagining what we want our arts communities to look like. So, it should be a very hopeful time. So we can really be hopeful and imagine what we want, this arts world to look like, more inclusive, more equitable, and really having access to arts across the city. That's what we hope, and that's what we hope to get out of this process with the community all a part of it.
So, we talked about rebuilding trust, and if someone's listening right now trying to decide if they're back to that point of trusting Metro Arts, what would you tell them are the biggest lessons that you've learned through all of this?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think people should take their time. When you lose someone's trust, it's not like somebody's going to give it to you automatically. We want to earn it back. So I hope that you give us an opportunity to earn that back. I think one of the things that's clear is, really being able to have an opportunity for consistent feedback. And as Daniel mentioned, now we have public comments. As a part of our mission in our meetings. We've always had that, but it's really defined now. You can comment multiple ways. You can do it online. You can also come to the meetings. We know that's not feasible for everybody to come to a meeting, to leave their job or work or come down. So you can actually do that online. So really having an opportunity and some defined ways that people can connect and give us their feedback. So that's one thing. So, if there's something that you want to share with us, then we have a way to get it. I think the other thing that is really key is just really being visible and, talking to people, going out and really making sure we're building those relationships, because it's not just going to be, hey, we want you to trust us again. We're going to have to take the time to do it. We're going to have to do the one-on-ones and have the meetings and have the sit downs to really rebuild those relationships.
Right. Well, Daniel, on a broader note, you've also just been getting the lay of the land of Nashville's art scene. And from a purely arts point of view, what are your priorities?
I have this image of Nashville, and I say there's like this amazing gear spinning in Nashville, beautiful colors, different speeds, different sizes. And I think what I would love to do is find a way to connect the ones that want to be connected and bring them in. So each gear is not spinning on its own, or if there's a ribbon we can connect two gears with. So that's what I'm looking at, is like, what does the ecosystem need? And having been a practicing artist, having run in arts organizations, running different arts agencies, I think that's what I'm really focused on, is like, what can we bring synergy and lift up the whole Nashville together? And one example is that we don't have a resident arts journalist in Nashville. For a city of our size and with a burgeoning art scene, music city, there's no resident music critic, So we're looking at all aspects of that. We're looking at arts education. We found out that 75% of arts education contracts have not been renewed post-pandemic. And so, what does that mean, right? K through 5 is the years. Those are formative for students to understand what their role is to be, whether it's in the arts or to be an arts patron. And so we're looking at all of those pieces and hoping that the strategic planning and the community input will help us figure out where we need to go from there.
So are you glad you took on this job?
I am very excited I took on this job.
Happy to be in Nashville.
Yes, and I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to get to know the community more as well.
Well, Daniel Singh is the new executive director of Metro Arts, and Mattia Powell is the chair of the Metro Arts Commission. Thank you both for being here. We want to thank everyone who tuned in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Steve Harush, Rose Gilbert, and Magnolia McKay. Our digital lead is Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Michaela Elias is our technical director. Our executive producer is Andrea Tudhope. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Nina Cardona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody.